Hi everyone who's joining. I'm Gabrielle. I'm one of the PISA Events aide alongside Grace, and we're very pleased and honored to be hosting this event for you today.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Grace and I'm your PISA Director of Events today. I apologize for the late start. We've had a couple of technical difficulties, but I hope you can all see me and hear me all right. If there are any issues, you can use the chat function or the Q&A to get in touch with me as your host. So we are so excited that you're joining us. I'd like to begin by providing a land acknowledgement. So we, as Bishop students, Bishop's University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki people. We recognize that the Abenaki and the Wabanaki Confederacy are the traditional stewards and protectors of the land upon which we are learning. So Gabby and I, alongside the rest of the PISA events team and our executives, are really honored that today's guest has chosen to present her story for us today. We've been working alongside Vicky, Boldo, and Shauna Jerome at the ISSC to ensure that this space remains respectful of her, and we hope that you will do the same. And which represents one of learning, which is our primary goal today. We would like to encourage our non-Indigenous peers to continue attending events like these and improve their knowledge of the lands we now call Canada. And this is hopefully in an effort to contribute to reconciliation and reconciliation. I'd like to give, first of all, a shout out to Shauna and Vicky, without whom this actually couldn't have been possible. PISA is always striving to improve inclusivity and allow students from our department the ability to learn from different perspectives in an interesting and always respectful manner. We're incredibly grateful for the time that you, Vicky, and Shauna have spent working with us on this event. And we would like to thank also Dr. Stina Linden Anderson for her support in this endeavor. So we hope that this will help broaden PISA's initiatives with the goal of better representing our students and improving their education. Finally, before we introduce today's guest, we would like to take a moment as well to recognize the upcoming initiatives hosted by the ICA, the ISSC, and the SCC. Namely, this coming Monday, February 14th, there will be a silent vigil held at the gazebo in front of the Library Learning Commons at 7 p.m. to commemorate missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people. On the same day, we would ask that you take a moment to craft a heart and write a message that you would like to send to the government in regards to support for Indigenous communities and its children. So this is called Have a Heart Day, and this is occurring on the same day as the vigil on the 14th. And without further ado, it is our pleasure to introduce author and activist Colleen Hele-Cardinal. Colleen is Plains Cree from Saddle Lake Cree Nation, Alberta, but is a 60s Scoop adoptee and raised in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. She's a community organizer, social justice advocate, author, COCUM, and student at Carleton University. Her work includes organizing gatherings for 60s Scoop children in Ontario, raising the issue of the 60s Scoop at an international level, and speaking about the displacement and loss of identity these survivors have experienced. Colleen also speaks publicly and candidly about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit, and volunteers with several initiatives, acts as a crisis counselor at the Hope for Wellness crisis line, and has spearheaded a mapping project of the 60s Scoop Diaspora. It's an incredible honor to have Colleen here today, and we will now give her the floor.
Oh, I was on mute again. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. And I also want to give appreciation and thanks to Bishop University and to yourself, to Vicky and all your hardworking team to bring me in virtually. Of course, I would have loved to be in there in person. It's so much more personable to do the drumming and have an opening and some smudge and just to like see your faces. But I'm so glad that you can make it here. I live in Ottawa. on Algonquin unceded territory. I've been here for about almost 12 years now, and I did a lot of healing here. And it wasn't until actually I started healing here in this territory that I started learning about the context of everything that I'm going to share with you. I learned it like a little bit, but I did most of my unlearning here and almost like reprogramming because, there's specific issues of when you're an adoptee that there's all these layers you got to undo and unlearn and then reprogram yourself to be Indigenous. So I'm going to share that with you. What else? So, it might be kind of troubling to look at this and say, I'm not supposed to be here. But as I began unlearning those things about me that were programmed as a child to be non-Indigenous, I realized that the government never intended for me to learn the true history of what happened to my family and my ancestors. I'm not supposed to be here. I should be doing something else. I should be really unconcerned about what's happening with our land and our territory and just consume. Actually, I should be probably downtown, fighting for freedom and with my Canadian flag. That's what I was supposed to be doing, right? If it was up to the government, I should have been completely and successfully assimilated, but I wasn't. So when I say that I'm not supposed to be here, I'm going to share with you the assimilation that's happened to myself and thousands of other Indigenous children. Some of the things I might share with you, you might have never heard before, so keep an open mind that, if you weren't taught this, I'm telling you that there's a reason why you weren't taught it. And what you might hear today might be different from the narrative that you were taught, the Canadian narrative. So the 60 Scoop Network is something that I created with a colleague of mine and a good friend who's also an adoptee. Her name's Acknowledgement, and a couple other adoptees here, including Vicky, who was a part of those gatherings that we created here in Ottawa. Like you said, like Grace said, I am a kokam. I'm a grandmother of 4 granddaughters who are like everything to me. And then I have 4 adult children, and I do a lot, but there's a lot to be done still. And it's for me, helping unlearn, that narrative that's been taught to us is so important to me. And if I could do a little bit of part in helping others unlearn and relearn and teaching them the context of what's happened to us is so important. So I'm going to go just a little bit over our current issues, just to give you an overview of what's happening in the world for us. And like these are issues that Indigenous people experience every single day. I don't really know any Indigenous folks that haven't been touched by any of these issues or have family members or loved ones who are experiencing all of these issues or one of these issues. It's part of our life. It's a heavy burden to carry. So in our families and our relatives and cousins and so on, we know women, Two-Spirit, and girls who've experienced violence, who've been killed or assaulted in Canada. We know family members who have been homeless and who are currently homeless, are experiencing housing insecurity or couch surfing, or on the verge of homelessness. Housing is a huge problem, not just on our communities, our First Nation communities, but in cities. And it's really hard, and those issues have a lot to do with racism and poverty. It's very hard to get a house now. If you've been criminalized, just based on your skin color, based on your income, it's very hard to get housing. You're judged right away. Myself, I'm very lucky. I'm fortunate. I have a good job, but that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to get a place. I practically, you could do everything right and still, sorry, that was the garbage can outside, still be denied housing. So it's a problem. In our communities, in our First Nations, Métis and Inuit, communities. We have folks that are committing epidemic rates of suicide, they're completing suicide, or at risk for suicide, living with PTSD or complex PTSD, or unresolved and undiagnosed PTSD, unresolved trauma, lack of mental health supports, and rampant addictions as a coping mechanism, self-medicating. And that's the narrative that a lot of people, they see the results, the stereotypes, right? Oh, you see like Indigenous people doing this and that, but you don't really understand what's happening and the context and the intergenerational trauma that's led to them using alcohol and drugs to cope, or gambling. And then of course, grief and loss. We have a lot of grief and loss. Loss could be not just like someone dying or someone leaving. It has to do with loss of childhood, loss of innocence, loss of identity, loss of culture, all those things combined. Right now, we have the highest rates of folks, Indigenous folks incarcerated. We literally fill the jails in Canada. We keep many guards employed. It's a whole business of probation and policing and keeping us incarcerated, even for a lot of petty crimes. In our First Nation communities, we have the highest rates of HIV and AIDS, not AIDS, HIV, sorry. And one of those things, one of the factors that is, when we talk about self-medicating and we talk about growing up with, this rings true for me. This is my story of like, I don't have HIV, but I put myself at risk for HIV. I'm going to be very candid with you. That's another thing about sharing my stories. I'm not afraid to share about what's happened to me and what kind of behaviors led to certain things and how I acted, right? So I grew up, of course, without love, without knowing what love feels like, without any kind of affection. So for me, sex was affection. And I grew up, putting myself at risk in sexual relationships. And not understanding that, I wasn't actually looking for sex, I was looking for love, but I was using sex to get it. And that's one of the contributors of HIV, but also HIV, IV drug use is rampant in our communities as well. So there's a high infection rate. I don't know if it's come down yet. The stats were for about 2 years ago. And then of course the racism. We don't like to talk about racism. For some reason, it makes people very uncomfortable. But for us, it's like, it's every day, it's everything, it's every part of our life. It's systemic, it's built into the making of Canada, it's built into the institutions that we attend, universities and healthcare. Everything is based on, a European viewpoint without considering the needs of First Nation people, Inuit people, and Métis people. And then, of course, we live with internalized racism ourselves, where we grow up hating who we are. The systemic racism, once you've experienced racism, you recognize it in everything. And I'll explain to you a little bit about loss of identity for me. And when I sometimes forget that I'm Indigenous, and that's that brainwashing of, to grow up to be a certain way, non-Indigenous, a way. I'd forget that I was Indigenous until I actually experienced racism. And that would mean like following me in the store, treating me poorly at the emergency room, like a rude service, like in stores and stuff like that. And I'm like, why are these people being so mean to me? And then I realized, oh my God, they're treating me badly because I'm brown, right? And I couldn't understand like why people would do that. And it's so blatant. It's actually kind of violent. It's scary to have people treat you like that. So anyways, these are a lot of issues to carry around with you every day. And some of the ways that we cope with it is through laughter and our ceremonies and things like that. So I'm going to share a little bit of context of how we got to all these issues. Now, one of the most important things to me when I'm teaching about like the 60s Scoop is I like to give a lot of context into what happened to Indigenous people. Now, we've heard about residential schools and this and that, and I don't know how much you know about it, but what I know is that a lot of people don't know about the treaties in Canada. And we're taught as Canadians in grade school, we're taught about how what do they call it? Explorers came and they discovered all these different things, and we're taught our provinces and our territories. We're taught our capital cities, and we have to color maps, and that's what we learn, right? That's part of that Canadian culture, and that's what I'm talking about when it's institutional. Our curriculum is designed to teach us a European view of how Canada came to be, but what they don't teach you is the purpose of treaty making and the treaties that are part of the making of Canada. So there's a dialogue that's missing from the context of how Canada was made. It's important that you know this because it sets a groundwork for the rest of the story that I'm going to tell you. So Indigenous people, we're not born knowing these things, these treaties, unless our parents know it and our parents tell us. And a lot of us don't have this story. I didn't grow up with this story. I didn't grow up knowing about the treaties. I actually grew up with the narrative that every other Canadian has, that my taxes pay for everything that Indigenous people have, which is wrong. It's completely wrong. And when I learned that First Nation people sign treaties with the state, which is Canada, to share our land and share all the resources on our land, and that the land originally belongs to us, but we agreed to share it with the new settlers. And in exchange, the resources that they use and pull off the land, the diamonds, the gold, the oil, anything that they pull out and off the land, that they make a profit off of it, a big portion of it goes towards Indigenous people and is set aside, and the rest of it funds Canada. It funds your military, your infrastructure, but that fund right there that is for First Nation people, and we signed in our treaties, that's our money, and that's what finances our First Nations, and the Indian Affairs is the one that manages it. So if you've never heard that before, I'm telling you that this is the truth. And you can go into Indian Affairs, you can look it all up, you can look at all the treaties and how they made those treaties. I can tell you right now, the treaties are not easy to understand. They're written in Old English. So as you can see, this is a treaty map. It's divided up into different territories. Right here is Treaty 6 between Alberta and Saskatchewan, and that's where I'm from, and I think Vicky might be from there. Each treaty has specific territories and boundaries and covers different nations. So my nation is Saddle Lake First Nation. I think we were called there was a certain name for our people. It's really hard to read, actually. It's Old English. It's written in all that thereas, whereas, and all these weird terms. It's very long, and our people didn't sign with our names. They signed with X's. I don't even know if they knew how to read that document. I think a lot of the treaties were signed under duress because our people were starving. My treaty is oil rich. So the lands that cover my treaty territory, there are oil, gas monies that are attached to that. And I just wanted the treaties are important because at the time, they gave $5, anywhere from $5 or $4 to $6, depending on what territory you're from, every year to honor the treaties. So we're talking like 1876, $5 was a lot. You could get a lot for $5. Now, you can't even get like a pop and a bag of chips. Like, you can't buy nothing with $5. So every single treaty member, the mother, father, the children would all get $5. And the chief would get, the medicine chest, which is just a medicine chest. They get a plow and stuff like that to farm the land. What's happened though is in this territory, Robinson-Huron Treaty, which covers all of like northern Lake Superior, that area, they took the federal government to court and said, listen, we want to get paid all the money you owe us for the inflation from whenever they signed the treaty up until now. So they owe them a lot of money, right? So $5 would be equal to what now? What would you say? 500? 5,000? Whatever $5 would be worth now as compared to 1876 is what all those bands will be paid out. They won, and because Canada has a fiduciary obligation to honor their treaties. When we have blockades and protests, and we say honor the treaties, we're talking about the agreements that we made to share the land. And right now, Canada has been doing the very minimum. That's why so many of our communities are living in poverty, without proper housing, without proper funding, without drinking water, because Canada gives the least amount of money that they have to, instead of giving us what we need. And that's the truth. So what's going to happen with the Robinson Huron Treaty winning? They're just waiting for, they had the province, what do they call it, stopped it. So they won against the federal government and they fought against the provincial government. So they're going to win because we're the original treaty signers. The province is just basically trying to stall so they don't have to pay. Every treaty will follow that lead, and they'll start taking the federal government to court and saying, hey, time to pay up, you owe us. And it's right. It's what needs to happen. So I don't know if you've heard of that information before about the treaties. If you want to learn more about it, you can always look up different videos about different treaties and find out what you need to know. So the other thing that happened with the making of Canada is the Indian Act. And the Indian Act is current today. There's still an Indian Act what do you call it? It's still effective today. Basically is a racist piece of legislation that literally segregated First Nations people from the rest of Canada. It is how they dealt with us First Nation people and put us onto reservations. The assimilation was one of the biggest things, was get them on this land, force their children to go to school, and then they'll want to blend into mainstream. But if they do that, that also means they need to disenfranchise, which means to give up their status rights. So they have no rights to the land. It's really, really insidious. That act is paternalistic and treats us like children. It still treats us like children. We have to use our chiefs and our councils to beg for everything that we get. So this is not a treaty. The Indian Act is actually, it's legislation, and it is still around to this day. I don't know if you heard of Duncan Campbell Scott, but he was the superintendent of Indian Affairs back in the day, Department of Indian Affairs, which is now something else. They keep changing the name every 2 years. But they wanted to literally kill the Indian and the child, and they wanted to wipe out our race so that nobody would be invested in the land. And there's a commonality here, and it has to do with land. Land is profit. So another thing I'm going to cover with you is we're going to talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirit, and girls. And the making of Canada was the othering of us, of our ancestors. Whereas we're not seen as human beings, we're seen as othering. And when you other people, when you call them you people or you over there, you make them less than, so that they're not even considered human beings, so that you can do all these awful things to them without feeling bad about it. And when you convince other people that they're others, like a whole country who believes all these awful things about Indigenous people, then it makes it okay to treat them bad too. And that's what you're seeing happen, is you have a whole lot of Canadians who have bought and subscribed into this othering of Indigenous people, whereas we're considered less than human beings. So it's okay to put them on reservations and segregate them and isolate them and make them dependent on the state. And it's okay to force their children to go to residential school because they're savages, or force their children into non-indigenous households and do whatever you want to them because they're not really people. We weren't actually considered people until 1965 when we were given the power to vote, which is kind of awful. The amount of damage that the Indian Act and the making of Canada has done to Indigenous people, we are still just, what do you call that? We're still reverberating from the effects of it. We're just starting to heal. And I mean like this, we're just starting to heal from that. We have generations of unresolved and intergenerational trauma from the physical and sexual abuse that we've experienced, my ancestors have experienced, so that the new people that came here to make their cities and their wealth so that they could prosper at our expenses. The media continues to perpetuate harm against Indigenous people through how they report on us, still dehumanizing and othering of us. And they do that, it's so subtle. Racism in this country is so subtle that everybody thinks it's normal. It's really, I've used that word before, insidious. It's so subtle. So one of those things I'm going to share with you later on about how they do that othering in the media and how they report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and how they report on Indigenous issues. Because most Canadians don't know the real issues. All they see is the effects. All they see is us struggling and our plight and, you know, us being the angry Indians. They don't understand why and how we got to here. So I'm going to do a little bit of sharing. So RCMP, the RCMP actually began as the Northwest Mounted Police, and they literally came here. They used to settle the land, and their interests have always been in protecting the corporate and protecting the state. It's never been about protecting us. It's always been about enforcing the state's policies and protecting the corporate interests, which is what they do now when it comes to like oil and gas. They're the first ones to come in and remove all the Indigenous people who are fighting for clean water and for their land. And their only interest is to make sure that the corporation is protected from us. So this is a Kent Monkman portrait of them removing Indigenous children back in the day and bringing them to residential school. You know, I work at Hope for Wellness, and we get a lot of calls from residential school survivors and day school survivors, and we get some calls from non-Indigenous folks who just don't understand why those parents sent their kids to that school. And I'm like, listen, they didn't really have a choice. They either were taken by force or they had to surrender them. The parents could go to jail if they didn't send their kids to school. That's how serious it was. And you can see the RCMP, like they used force, they used guns. They were the ones that were sent to collect the children who tried to run away from the residential schools. So this is the residential school that my parents went to. Well, not my dad, my mom, all my mom's sisters and brothers, and then on my dad's side, some of his sisters and brothers went to Blue Quills. I didn't know they went to residential school. They never talked about it. When I repatriated with my birth family, none of them talked about it. And that's really common. Residential school survivors don't talk about it. Some of them take it to the grave. So when I found out that my mother went to residential school in 2015 is when I got confirmation. That's not too long ago. I had to go there. I had to go visit that school. I needed to see it. Today, it is it's a university. It's an accredited university. There's a lot of political history with this school because what they did was it's the first residential school they had a sit-in. Pierre Trudeau was a prime minister, I think, at that time. And they took back their school and they made it an Indian school, the first Indian school. So I'm not going to go into that today, but the RCMP, there is a huge lack of trust between Indigenous people and the RCMP because they were used against us for removals, for punishment, for, you know, just a lot of violence. There's reports about the violence that women have experienced from RCMP out west when it comes to women who've gone missing. So that's important. The 60s Scoop. The 60s Scoop is definitely not a scoop of ice cream. It's not a flavor. It is a term that's been applied to the early, well, from about, now it's 1951 to early 80s. I didn't realize it went back that far, but there are adoptees that were taken in the early 50s, and it stopped in 1985. And the reason why it stopped was, I'll share that with you in a minute, but it's basically a catch-all phrase for us. So Vicky and I, we identify as 60s Scoop adoptees. My friend Elaine, you know, a lot of us call ourselves 60s Scoop adoptees. It's not our term. We didn't make it up. Somebody else did. This woman, her name is Bridget Moran. She was a social worker in BC, and what she witnessed was like tens and 20s amounts of children were being taken off communities out west in BC, like by the busload from communities, and she started calling it the Scoop, and then Patrick Johnston like coined the term in a book about native adoptions, and it just kind of stuck. And so it's not our term. We didn't come up with that, but that's what we use to call ourselves, how we refer to ourselves. And Dr. Raven Sinclair uses it as a catch-all phrase that highlights this period, and not just for adoptees, but for, white cat just touched me, long-term foster care survivors. So this woman in the background, that's Marcia Brown. She's the one who initiated the 60s Scoop class action, and I'll get into that after. So if you hear the 60s Scoop, it's from 1951 to 1985. That's the term. And then after 85, it's the Millennium Scoop, which is current foster care. Some of the ways that they solicited us through, so a lot of us were taken from our homes, from our communities, from the hospital. Either we were forced into surrendering, our parents were forced into surrendering us, or social workers just come and took us. And there's a lot of like context to that. A lot of our parents were residential school survivors. When I think about residential school, and what I know now is that there was a lot of, it was institutionalized, right? It's a place where you're told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. There's no free thinking, there's no critical thinking. It's all like, get up, do this, do that, do this, do that, go to bed. You're not shown love, you're not shown affection, you're not taught any kind of skills. You're there, and you're only there up until grade 8, and then you're sent back to your community. So these children, my parents, my ancestors, you know, imagine, you know, being taught what to do. No, I mean, not being taught what to do, but just said, you know, go clean this, do that, do this, do that, and then go to bed. And not shown affection, not shown anything. And also experiencing like physical sexual abuse and the trauma of just being taken away from your parents. And then you go back to your community from the residential school, and there's nothing there. There's no jobs, your parents are self-medicating with alcohol, there's tremendous poverty. Like, there's just a lot of factors to consider, right? At the time my sisters and I were taken, my parents were both alcoholics. At that time I didn't have any context of what was happening for them, but I just know that they drank and there was violence. So this picture you see on the top left is my sisters and I. We were all adopted together. It's very rare back then to be adopted with your siblings. Usually they split them up. These little dresses we have on were too small for us. And my little dress, I was a very chubby little baby. That's me at the bottom right hand. And the sleeves, I had like fat little arms, and the sleeves were cutting into my arms, and I was still in a diaper, I believe. The girl in the middle is my late sister Gina. She was the one who was murdered, And then this one here on the left-hand side is Patty. She's still living out in Edmonton. Some of the ways they used to solicit us was this picture that you see of my sisters and I is from a catalog of Native children and hard to adopt, hard to place children, and they refer to those children as Mongoloid. And that's an awful, awful term, but that's the term they used at the time. So this catalog was basically like a photo album of Indigenous children, Native children, and white children who were hard to adopt, hard to place. And this is how my parents picked me out of a catalog, this catalog of pictures. The other program they used was AIM, which was Adopt the Indian and Métis Child, which was an aggressive campaign to get these children from foster care into adoptive homes. I have a feeling that they didn't vet a lot of these homes because a lot of children were sexually and physically abused in these homes. They used newspapers, television. They had a television program called, what was that television program? Her name was Helen Allen, and Bob Barker did this Today's Child, that's what it's called. And the woman won the Order of Canada twice for adopting over 10,000 children, not just Native children, but a lot of other children. So if you have a self-interest, go to YouTube, type in Helen Allen, Today's Child, and you can see there's a family on there of adopted children, and it's like a big episode, right? It's kind of mortifying to watch when you have the context and you understand, like, you know, these children were I think they were from Michigan or something. Anyways, there was a whole lot of money put in from the federal government into the provincial provinces to literally child traffic, to take us from our communities. My original community was Saddle Lake, Alberta, Plains Cree Territory, and we were brought all the way to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, which is Anishinaabe territory. We were placed in a home in Sault Ste. Marie. We were brought there by 2 social workers on a plane. Somebody paid for that, and we were left with these people. And I don't think those social workers came back. I don't remember ever seeing them again. I just know that we were left with these people, and one day we called them mom and dad, and that was that's a lot of similar stories for other adoptees as well. The one thing that Dr. Raven Sinclair made clear in her report was how they talked about us in these ads. So they made Native children sound like, if you adopt this child, you will give so much to her. You will give so much to her, like she needs you. But when they phrased for white children was, she will add to your life. This child will add to your life. She'll give so much to your life. But it's the other way around for Native children. It's like we're poor little puppies or something, and we need to be saved. So this was some adoption photos I managed to keep or save. Some of them my daughter stolen from me because my adoptive mother wouldn't give me access to pictures of my sisters and I. You know, we look happy. We're smiling. You know, I don't think we had a choice. I think we were told to smile, because behind the scenes we were not happy. You know, my first memory in that household was fear. You know, we also were not shown love and affection. My sisters and I were like treated like second-class citizens in that home. We did all the work in the house, and you know, at the time I was little, I didn't realize that my sisters were experiencing sexual abuse. But we grew up in a home filled with fear, and you know, they have their own natural-born son. He was their natural child, and he never experienced what we experienced, and he also didn't have to do the amount of work we had to do. So it was a hard childhood. One of the things about, like, that doesn't go away from me is because of all the work I've done as a child, like non-stop work. And if it wasn't work, my parents had us doing like swimming. We were very athletic. So I don't know how to rest. I don't know how to stop. So I constantly do a lot of work. I'm a workaholic a little bit. It's something you can't shut off, right? So I feel guilty if I'm not busy and being productive. One of the pictures that was the funniest that I have is my sisters and I dressed up like Indians, and we didn't even know we were Native, right? We had no idea. I didn't even know until I was a teenager. So I thought it was pretty cool to dress up like an Indian, and I'm like thinking now, what was my adoptive mother thinking, dressing us up in potato sacks like Indians? Like, what was her mentality behind that? Anyways, I thought it was kind of cool photo to share. And you can see our ugly clothing from the 80s. Oh, that awful dress. Now this is my biological family. So these photos came to me. They're like little gifts that have been given back to me of who my relatives are. Now I met all of them, right? But I never met them when they were young. I met them when they were very hard into their addiction. I met them on Skid Row, and I didn't get to know them the way that I wanted to get to know them. I wanted to hear stories about me and my sisters. I wanted them to, you know, say how much they missed us, and we never got any of that. So it was, you know, seeing these photos of my family together, not drunk, you know, is like a gift to me. Seeing my family, my parents' photo together healed my heart, because when I look at my child welfare file, it says my parents drank and there was violence, and so I just believe that they were bad people in my mind. You know, that child welfare file made me believe that my parents were bad people and they didn't want me, or they were bad parents. And when I see these photos, I see two people who loved each other, and you know, I see a lot of my features, and it just gave me a lot of healing. One of the photos here I have is of my mother, her residential school yearbook photo. Her name was Esther, Dolly Esther Cryer. Everybody called her Esther. My kokum, my grandmother, my dad's mom, she loved her grandchildren, and I heard a story not too long ago from her daughter, who at that time was 12 years old when we were taken. She said, my mom cried her eyes out when you guys were taken. And it made me cry, because I was like, oh my God, like, you know, my community, they suffered. And you know what? They didn't talk about it because it was too painful. There's too much shame. There's too much guilt to talk about those 3 children that were taken away and never seen again. So that was hard for my family and my parents. So I'm just gonna take a little drink of my coffee. 1 second. I want to talk about identity and what identity means. You know, for a lot of folks who are looking for identity or talk about their identity, oh, I'm so-and-so, and I'm from here, and I'm from there, and my parents came from here, and I didn't really look at my birth certificate until when I moved here to Ottawa, and I realized that on my birth certificate, my birth parents, of course, weren't on there. My adopted parents were on there. My adopted father came straight from England. He was born there, so it's on his birth certificate. And because I have a long form birth certificate, it shows my adopted parents' names, and they come from England. So if you were to look at my birth certificate, you would say that I'm from England, right? My relatives are from England, which completely wipes out my connection to my culture, my identity as a nehiyaw iskwew from Saddle Lake, Alberta. I don't know how to say my community in Cree yet. Nehiyaw is Plains Cree. It really hit me then about how they had altered my identity, wiped out my connection to my land, to my clans, to my relatives, to everything. I was a heel now. I'm a heel. Heel is a German name, German, English, British, whatever. They have their own like clan in England. They have their own actual clan. So when you're absorbed into the mainstream population, you're not connected to your land. You don't really care about where you're from. You're invested in yourself and gaining wealth and getting a house, and you know, it's very individualistic. But as a First Nation person, you know, if you grew up with your culture and your language and your spirituality, you'd be invested in everything. Your relationships would involve every living thing, plus your community and your family members. But I didn't have that. So I didn't care about the land. I didn't care about the animals. I didn't care about nothing. I cared about me and me getting lots of money and a house and a car and, you know, all the materialistic things. Never made me happy though. And I didn't understand why I had a big hole in my heart. A lot of us adoptees didn't know that we were entitled to be a status Indians, which is part of our treaty, where we're entitled to non-insured health benefits, where we get glasses, dental care, and all that is connected to treaty monies. All that, you know, the stuff they talk about we get for free, that comes from our treaty money that's set aside for us forever until the resources run out or until Canada cease to exist. You can't do one without, you can't get rid of the treaties. They're always there. Without the treaties, Canada won't exist. Everybody will have to go home. I don't think that'll happen. But so like non-indigenous folks, like a lot of you folks, we're just learning about it too. We have a lot of unlearning and relearning to do as well. So some of us have been very successfully assimilated and indoctrinated into Christianity and Catholicism and all that. So one of the biggest things I learned and I had to come to grips with was a loss of language and loss of culture, like spirituality. And what I learned was when I was living in Sault Ste. Marie, I went to college and I took Anishinaabe, which is Ojibwe language. Took 4 years of it. And the first thing I learned was about inanimate and animate objects, where we believe that things have spirit. Trees have spirit. Well, of course, animals have spirit. Rocks have spirit. Like, there's things with spirit and there's things without spirit. And depending on what has a spirit and what doesn't have a spirit will depend on what our language tells us how to interact with that and how to take care of it. Our language is very deliberate. It's very much, this is what you do to this because this thing has a spirit. And this is what you do with that because this thing doesn't have a spirit. And it teaches us how to live on the land. It's like a code of living. How to live on the land while caring for all living things and doing no harm. This was our original way of life. And we've lost that because of residential schools and the 60s Scoop. And we're just starting to get it back. You know, we're just starting to value those relationships and understand how much we've lost. So I don't want you to think that, yes, there was a lot lost, but the youth are the ones that are bringing it back. The youth are saying, we need to learn our language because our elders are dying. And pretty soon there won't be any fluent speakers. We need to learn those stories. We need to learn all those stories that our elders are passed on through oral tradition, right? So we always used oral storytelling to carry on all those traditions, to talk about the different ways to take care of things on the land. I'm not going to read all this to you. This is a lot to read. I can probably pass on my PowerPoint to Grace and Vicky, but I just want you to know that yes, residential school survivors have been through a lot. They deserve all the attention and listening and all that they get, but 60 Scoop survivors have been through just as much. And the difference between us is, like, the residential school survivors were brought to one location, and these locations were all over Canada. They were physical buildings, whereas the 60 Scoop, those deals were done behind closed doors, and we were literally trafficked from one community to another. And you're going to see in the end when I share my map that some adoptees were taken as far as England, as far as like Germany, New Zealand, Australia, and a ton went to the States. A lot of us were brought from out west and settled into Ontario. So a lot of us are still dealing with identity crisis. A lot of us are living with unresolved trauma from physical, sexual, emotional abuse. Some of us still haven't found our original families. We have to do all this work on our own. There's nobody out there doing this for us. I mean, we try and help a little bit at the network, but we don't have any resources to do that, like to provide money for that. Of course, like I shared with you, our identities have been altered. So sometimes finding our original documents can be really a big bureaucracy, right? Our names have been changed and everything. The other thing we don't talk about is when we're repatriated with our biological families, there's a huge culture shock, right? You go from being completely assimilated and surrounded by only white folks. I hope you don't get offended that I'm using the word white, but that was my world growing up. I didn't see anybody who looked like me at all. Not one single person. Maybe on TV I seen in this old show called Chips, there was a brown guy, his name was Ponch. I think he was Mexican, but he was the only brown guy I seen as a child. And my sisters. I honestly believe I tanned really well in the summertime, and it just lasted all year. And some of my classmates too would tease me and say I'm brown because I eat brown bread. Like, nobody told me until I was a teenager that I was, you know, First Nation or Native or Indian. Those were the terms I used back then. So when we're brought back to our biological families, there's huge culture shock. There's a lot of things that we haven't experienced. If we've never been to a reserve, we've never been around our own people, it can be hard. We feel, even to this day, we still feel caught between two worldviews, like we don't fit in anywhere. So that can be hard. And of course, we live with increased health issues. To this day, I have tremendous health issues because of living with unresolved trauma for so many years, and fight or flight, so on. And a lot of us die from this, diabetes and heart disease and things like that. So lots going on for us. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about missing and murdered Indigenous women and how that affected my family. I just want to get some feedback for a minute. Is it really noisy for you there? Okay, I'm just going to tell my daughter to stop doing the dishes, okay? Okay, Chrissy, can you stop for a bit? Because they can hear it. All right, so I want to talk about like how the media does harm, and I'm going to share with you some stuff about my sister. So like I said, my sisters and I repatriated back to our biological families. So we eventually moved. I took a Greyhound from Sault Ste. Marie to Edmonton by myself. I was 16 years old. My older sister was already out there, Gina, and I stayed with her for a bit. This was 1989. I ended up like leaving her household and going to stay with a boyfriend. And anyways, fast forward, my sister Gina had just gotten restitution for the sexual abuse that my adoptive father did to her. So she got $15,000. He was ordered to pay to her and to my other sister, Patty. She had just gotten that money. She only had it for maybe 4 or 5 days. She had bought herself a beautiful boogie van, like those vans with no windows, and it was all souped up and customized, and she had jewelry on. Like she was, you know, she was very happy. She bought herself some clothes. Now my sister, she smoked pot. She didn't smoke pot though. She smoked hash, which is very like, I don't even know. I don't smoke pot or hash. I don't know, but it's like, it's the black tar stuff. And she used that to self-medicate because she had anxiety, and of course, like the stuff that my father did to her, I think it was hard to live with her. She never got counseling. Anyway, she was in this park buying drugs. She was buying drugs from somebody she knew. I think he tried to rob her because she had money and she had jewelry and everything. My sister was a fighter. She was a scrapper like you wouldn't believe. She was very fiercely protective of me. If anybody tried to mess with me, she would like want to scrap them right away. I was actually scared of her. She was really tough. Anyways, what happened was I just given birth to my daughter, my oldest daughter, and she was only like 2 or 3 weeks old. So this was, I gave birth on July 3rd. July 25th, I woke up and I seen the newspaper and it said foul play. Naked body of woman found in downtown park known for drugs and prostitution. And I'm like, whoa, holy, it's probably some prostitute, I'm thinking. And the thing that disturbed me was, you know, the woman's leg was sticking out and the men are standing over her, like, and it describes her as being naked. And I was like, this is horrifying. You know, at that time, I was 17. I didn't really have insight into that. I didn't have a critical analysis of that kind of stuff. I actually put it out my mind. I was so desensitized to violence at that time. And I found out later that day that it was my sister. And that's how I found out. My dad called me and he said, you know, that woman they found in the park? And I said, yeah, and like, that was your sister. So I was like, it completely changed my life. It took me 10 years to recover from that because I'd never actually had anybody die on me before, and the brutal way that she was killed was traumatizing for me. I had nightmares for years. I couldn't even close my eyes without seeing her face because they had an open casket. I don't think they should have had one. I was too young, I think, to view that. I mean, I was too young to even have a kid, but here I am at my sister's funeral and they had an open casket and I didn't recognize her. She was so brutalized. It traumatized me. And it took a long time to accept that she was dead, to accept that she was never coming back, but also to get over those images in my mind. And anyways, fast forward to when I moved here and I went through counseling and I started, you know, resolving some of that historical trauma. Hold on for a second. There's a cop car going by. Ambulance. What I had kept that newspaper clipping. I knew one day that it would be important to me. I don't know why I kept it. But what I started recognizing was how they talked about First Nation women and how they talk about non-indigenous women. And how they don't care if they show their bodies. If they don't care at all. So when they pulled Tina Fontaine out of the river, they didn't care that she was in a bag. They took pictures of it and they put it on the internet, and they talked about Cindy Gladju's vagina on display at her trial. They would never, ever do that to a white woman, ever. There would be so much outrage, you know, and that's what I realized. The media is responsible for the harm it creates, and how they report on us, how they describe us, how they talk about us, and like we're deserving of the violence that we experience. Like somehow it's our fault. Like if she wouldn't have been in that park known for drugs and prostitution, she would have been killed, you know. And they really focused on the fact that, you know, she had been a prostitute before. Long time ago, she was 16. When she fled home and ran away to Toronto to escape physical and sexual abuse, she did sex work, and that's what they focused on. You know, what they didn't focus on was that she was married and she had 2 children, and that she was just going there to buy some hash. Back then, people didn't smoke pot really; it was kind of rare. Out west, people smoked that hashish. Anyways, that's what they focused on, and you'll see that they do that with a lot of First Nation people, Inuit people, Métis people, and how they report about their deaths, as if they've done something wrong. Drugs or alcohol contributed to it, and they never give context, right? I think, and one of the things that I like to tell students is to be critical of the media that you consume. And if you think something's wrong, your gut tells you that this is wrong, I want you to call out that media. And I want you to say, hey, we're tired of the way that you're reporting about this. We know different. We want you to do better. That's what I ask people to do. When it comes to reporting on missing and murdered Indigenous women, we already have enough stuff going on for us. We don't need the media against us too. So when I moved here, I met a woman here. Her name was Bridget Tolley, and another woman, Kristen Gilchrist. They are good friends of mine still. I was walking by Parliament Hill and I seen they had placards of these women who had been murdered and gone missing. And one of them was my sister-in-law, Lynn. my late husband's sister was also murdered in 2005. At that time, they figured that they had a serial killer in Edmonton because over 35 women in a short period of time, over 3 or 4 years, had gone missing and murdered in fields and ditches around Edmonton. There's literally a map showing these were all sex workers from downtown Edmonton, 118th Avenue, who were known to either be involved in drugs or sex work. Now, Lynn, I don't think she was involved in sex work, but I think that I knew she liked to party. I don't know to the extent of like why she went missing in that, but her body was found in Wetaskiwin, just outside of Wetaskiwin, which was known as a place where they dump bodies. I don't know if there's 1 or 2 or 3 serial killers, but Indigenous women at that time were a target. And so Lynn was also murdered. So we honor and remember her every year because the media did about 3 sentences on her and they've never followed up on it. So her killer still remains on the loose. Bridget Tolley's mother was, she's from Kitagan-ZB, which is about 2.5 hours north of here in Quebec. And her mother was killed by the Sûreté de Quebec with the police, the French police, and they hit her with their cruiser and then blamed her and said she was a drunken Indian. And, you know, Bridget launched an inquiry and everything. And you know, in the end, they just said it was her fault. So she never did get justice. But every year we have a vigil. We do a lot of, we're very critical of on how the government handles missing and murdered Indigenous women issues, because I really believe that unlearning and community grassroots work starts with us in our own homes, with ourselves, with our families, with our community. We need to unlearn those harmful things, and we need to start supporting and valuing our community members, our children, and so on. So coming together with other family members who are needing support and who are grieving is something that I believe in, and validating their stories and ceremony, you know, just really supporting each other and listening. And I really like the event that you announced about like having a heart and saying, you know, putting somebody's name on there and saying, you know, like we remember you. We remember that you were here once, and that you were missed and that you were loved, you know. So that's some of the work that I do with missing and murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirited Girls, and Bridget Tolley and Kristen. They started an organization. Well, not an organ. It's very grassroots, very critical of the government. We believe in alternatives to state intervention. We believe in supporting community and each other and creating safe spaces. One of the things that they helped me with was to tell my story. So I couldn't be here doing this work that I'm doing today without them. They would bring me to all their events that they went to, and they would encourage me to speak, and I would say, no, not yet, I'm not ready. And then finally I would get up and I say, you know, my sister was murdered. And just saying that, it used to get stuck right here, a big lump in my throat. And finally I was able to say my sister was murdered. But then I started talking about like my sisters and I, you know, we're 60s Scoop adoptees, and this is what happened to us. And then I started making connections with all these things that happened to us and how we got to where we are. And what it's helped me do was meet other 60s Scoop survivors like Vicky, Elaine, and Keely, where we come together and we're like, listen, we need a space for 60s Scoop survivors like ourselves, where we can come together and be heard and feel validated and listen to each other's story, where it's just us. And we were the first ones in Canada to do this. Actually, I'm sorry, I lied. Edmonton did one in 2009. It was a little bit different than ours. Ours was more grounded in ceremony, where we went to Algonquin elders and asked for permission to do that work, where we went to the water and we did ceremony and made sure that everything we were doing was in a good way so that we would not harm anybody. And we began very simple with just fundraising and sending out donations letters. We got support from unions, from local businesses. We did karaoke karaoke fundraiser, which was fun. And our biggest support came from non-indigenous community members, activists and allies. They were the best. So this is a picture of us going down to the water to put some tobacco down, and it was an amazing time. It was our first gathering. That was in 2014. It was pretty amazing. We had over 102 people apply. 67 came. Vicky's in there somewhere. I don't see Elaine in there. I don't know where she is, but it was an amazing time. We had a sacred fire. We had feasts and food and sharing stories, sharing circles and entertainment. It was a lot of fun. We had survivors come from every part of Canada, and they came on their own dime. They took a plane, a bus, whatever, just to be there with other survivors, because it was the first time that survivors had a space of our own. The second gathering, we took it out to the land. We did drum making. We had a giveaway. We had a sacred fire. It was an amazing time. I think Vicky's there too in the top right. We had art therapy. It was amazing. It was an amazing time for us. That was 2015. We wanted to make sure that we're meeting people where they're at, that we're supporting people who are in crisis. Every thought and detail went into these gatherings to making sure that they were safe and inclusive, that we were making sure to include two-spirit trans people, making sure that we're meeting people who may have addiction issues and so on. So it was a really well thought out. Our third national, we got a little bit more funding from the federal government. We were able to fly people in this time from all over the place as far as New Zealand. That was an amazing gathering. We had a blanketing ceremony where we had an elder who blessed the blankets, and each person was blanketed. And what it was like being welcome back home. And home is not a location. Home is a place in yourself where you feel connected to other people. And they felt home with each other. And almost all these survivors are still friends and still communicate with each other. So we've created a larger community, right? The thing is, I didn't really get to participate in the gathering. I was so busy running around doing everything. I mostly had time to just stop and take pictures, and that's about it, because I was always behind the scenes, like running everything. So I didn't really get to participate in the gathering, which is fine, that's okay. Our fourth gathering and our last gathering was 2018, and we got hit by, well, we didn't get hit by a tornado, but Ottawa did. And we had like 4 or 6 tornadoes. We were very lucky we didn't get hit, but we lost all power and all water. Thankfully, we had a generator with an outhouse and air conditioning. Yeah, that was pretty, yeah, I have a thing about outhouses. If you read my book, you'll know why. So same thing, we flew people in. And then what happened was the federal government announced that time that they had settled the 60 Scoop thing, and they stopped all funding for 60 Scoop survivor gatherings. There would be no more federal support for 60 Scoop survivor initiatives because they made a settlement and they said, you know what, we don't need to support you anymore. Awful. One of the things I wanted to do, I had an idea from 2014 where I went to No One Is Illegal conference, which is No One Is Illegal is a group of folks across Canada who help new settlers to get situated, help with them with their legal problems, and create a community for settlers who are here coming from all over the world. Ouch. And basically I went there and they had this huge white sheet up on the wall. And what they did was ask people to take colored yarn and kind of tell a story with that yarn from their original country to where they are now, or where they've been in the world. And I'm like, wow, we need to do that for 60 Scoop survivors. We need a digital map to show people where we've been taken to and where we ended up and where we are now. And a database for survivors to find family members and so on. So it took me a long time to get the money to do this because GIS maps are not well funded, and it was considered almost like a social program or something, and it wasn't well funded. People don't really believe in GIS maps, not for this kind of stuff anyways. So I was finally able to kind of hobble some money together and hire some guys who did GIS work, and what we were able to do was put together a map. Can you see this still? Can you let me know if you see this?
Yep, we see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm going to show you the live version of the map. So basically, this is the map. It's an interactive map. On here, survivors can look for their stories. So if you wanted to look for mine, you could just put in Colleen Hele-Cardinal, and mine will come up, and it'll show you right here where I come from, where I was taken to. All right. And then on this side right here, where'd it go? Sorry, 1960, down here. No, right here. Sorry, I already got lost. Well, that's great because I can just like go. So there's so many people that were taken from Edmonton. There's quite a few stories in there. So this is mine, and what you could do is actually like upload photos. You can say right here like what you're looking for if you want people to contact you. You can share as much or as little as you want in this story. So it's a very awesome. You can actually put up a video if you want. So a lot of survivors, I think, are kind of shy to talk about their story, but I'm not. So I've added a video, and basically I kind of created this map for survivors, but also for non-indigenous folks and people worldwide to show what the displacement of indigenous children looks like at a global level. So these are all indigenous children who were taken from their communities and brought to places across the world and adopted and raised in non-indigenous households. And they've grown up in those homes and adopted those customs of the people that they grew up with. So you have folks who were taken to like Scotland, Germany, Ireland, whatever. They grew up with the customs of the families that they grew up in. So you have, I have a friend who is from Kenora, very strong indigenous features, but he has an English accent, and he dresses really dapper, and he has all those sayings that British people say. And he said when he first repatriated from his family, he was a celebrity. So one of the things is you can actually isolate the provinces and just put like how many people from BC, where they were taken in the world. So that's my baby. You can share it and talk about it as much as you need to. I'm trying to get as much viewership as I can, and support for it. There's also a donate button. So that's my baby project, and we'll go back to here to my PowerPoint. And the next one is last year I worked with Amnesty International and NDP government to petition the Prime Minister for a national apology, which we still haven't got, but not just an apology. We wanted them to ask us for forgiveness for what they've done to our families and to us. Because not only were we affected as adoptees, our families, our biological families were affected, and our communities, and in some cases, adopted families. A lot of those adopted families did not know what they were getting into, and I feel like they were taken advantage of by the government. I mean, it doesn't give them a right to mistreat Indigenous children, but there are some Indigenous families that were good and well-intentioned, right? So they tabled it, and it never really went anywhere. So if you want to do some work with that and trying to push for an apology and say, hey, how come you're not doing anything about the 60s Scoop? Giving them money is not enough. It's not enough. The only other thing I forgot to mention was the 60s Scoop settlement, which is awful. It's a really awful settlement. We're still waiting for the second half of our money. So we were given $21,000 interim. We don't even know when the second part of our money will come. It's basically a common experience payment that was settled. I can get into that more, but I think my time is coming up here. So Do I have enough time to talk about the settlement?
Yeah, I think 10 more.
All right, so in 2017, actually it was Valentine's Day, they announced 60 Scoop settlement. So initially the settlements, not the settlement, I'm sorry. Initially it started as a 60 Scoop class action in Ontario. And it had been in court for a long time. So initially 2005, I got an email saying if you were adopted and raised in Ontario, you may be qualified for this class action. I emailed them, I was added to the list. That class action was actually registered in 2009 in the provincial court, and Marcia Brown won. She won, and the only reason she won was because the Ontario Provincial Child Welfare Act, the 1965 Ontario Provincial Child Welfare Act, had a clause in it that said Canada had a fiduciary obligation to protect Indigenous children's, First Nation children's culture. First Nation and Inuit children's culture, not Métis. The Métis were left out of this. So initially, that class action was a win for the Ontario adoptees, and Marcia Brown at that time knew that the other provinces didn't have that clause in their provincial legislation, their child welfare legislation. So she negotiated for a national settlement for all 60 Scoop survivors, Canada-wide. They widened the parameter to foster care children who have been in for minimum 5 years. They had to be status Indian or qualified for status, and Inuit from 1951 to 1991. So the thing was, you know, a lot of this was done without consultation, and I guess like you don't really have to give consultation when it comes to a civil class action or anything like that. The terms are very much like the lawyers usually get 40%. In this case, they got 10%, which was 75 million, and 750 million was set aside for Indigenous, for us, for 60 Scoop survivors. They hired an actuary, which is somebody who does risk management, and he determined that 22,400 folks would be eligible for this settlement, and 35,000 people applied. And why they got 35,000 people was because they forgot to say that there was a 5-year limit on the amount of time you had to be in foster care. So anybody who was in foster care applied. So a lot of people are getting rejected and they don't understand why. So when COVID hit, it kind of set everything back, and it is harder for them to access the provincial child welfare records to confirm that people were in care or adopted and so on. So a lot of people are still waiting for their records. They gave us 21,000 for the folks that were already vetted. So we got letters saying, yes, you are eligible. We got $21,000, not last year, was it last year? I can't even remember. We're still waiting for the rest of the payment. We're supposed to get the rest of it. It depends on how many people are in the class, are in the settlement, will depend on how much people how much money everybody gets. So we were told anywhere from 25,000 to 35,000. So we don't know how much we're getting, but this is only for common experience. It's for loss of culture. It's not for the abuses that we suffered while we were in these homes. Now, I sat down with Minister Carolyn Bennett at the time. She was the Minister of Indigenous Affairs. She said, well, you can sue the provinces for negligence. You know how hard it is to sue provinces for negligence? Like she made it sound so easy, right? Like, oh yeah, you can just sue them for abuses. And there's so many of us that experience abuses, sexual and physical abuse, and are still recovering from that. So I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it was really hard for a lot of folks to see, you know, day school survivors being paid out. Their day school settlement was settled after ours began, and they're paid out for physical and sexual abuses in those schools, and we don't even get that. So we're just like, how come we don't matter? Why are our stories important enough? Like we went through just as much or more in the suburbs and homes behind closed doors, right? Like, and we never got to go home. A lot of us never went home. So I'm still figuring out what I'm doing with that. I'm consulting with a couple of lawyers right now. But yeah, so part of my healing not only was returning to culture and ceremony, was actually writing my book. And I'm actually doing a presentation on Friday for the University of Victoria Humanities program. And if you're interested in this book, you can read a little bit about my story. It's a very easy read from what I heard, but adoptees are starting to share their story. So that's me. Thank you for listening. I hope that you learned something. And if you have any questions, please, and we'll have a question period.
Colleen, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us and going through the details from the 60 Scoop settlement to reliving your experiences and telling us very difficult accounts, you know, differentiating between differences of healing between, you know, residential school survivors and 60 Scoop survivors. These are all things that we have the privilege to not have to think about and face every day, and to have to face a lot of the identity issues that adoptees face. So we once again just reiterate that we are so incredibly grateful that you took the time to share us your story.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for inviting me.
And yeah, of course it's an honor to have you. With the remaining time we have left, we would love to open up a Q&A for all of the attendees here. And so everyone, you should be able to see a question and answer submission, a question submission page on the right side of your screen. So if you just type up any questions you have, and Grace and I will be moderating, and Colleen, you just stay on screen and we'll discuss.
Okay.
All right. While we wait for questions to roll in, I was wondering, Colleen, you talked about how the media's portrayal of missing murdered Indigenous women, Two-Spirit girls, is incredibly problematic in how they portray, how they report between, you know, a white woman and someone who is not. And I was wondering, on a side note, do you have any recommendations of news sources or reporters at perhaps a major news source that we can really be looking into and following to challenge our own internal biases and how we understand and look at First Nations women?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, most of the mainstream media, they're pretty like I think the worst one's the Sun, CTV, and I usually follow a lot of grassroots media.
Okay.
Like grassroots media or independent media, they're a little bit better. They're a little bit have a better critical analysis of what's happening. I know, like, we've put out a few articles, like collaborative, like a lot of academic articles are really good, right? Especially Indigenous women who publish.
Mm-hmm.
They have a really good critical analysis, and you can kind of understand like how they see it and understand like the thinking behind it. And you know, I can't think of any off the top of my head right now, but
It's okay.
Yeah, they're like Naomi Sayers. She's a Indigenous lawyer. Her and I and Melody Wood did a couple pieces. Well, we did 2 pieces on the toast, it's called. But like any of those independent medias that are a little bit more like activist kind of, they're good at writing about Indigenous issues that have a better critical analysis than most mainstream medias. You can see the differences in how they report. Even now, like even with the protests downtown here in Ottawa, there's the mainstream media and how they report it, and then there's a critical analysis of like what's actually happening. Like, what is this? And, you know, when you're using that kind of critical analysis, everybody thinks you're crazy, right? They think you're like, oh, you're being, you know, but you can actually see the breakdown of like, okay, this is what's actually happening. There's like, you know, this, you know, white supremacy happening, and these are like the roots of the issues of, you know, that's the kind of writing that I really appreciate is breaking things down so that people can understand it, instead of just saying, oh, this Indigenous woman was killed. You know, that's not good for me.
I was gonna, can I add something there, Colleen?
Sure.
Just from what we've learned over the years as well, like as far as it goes with media, I mean, even in mainstream media, I learned really quickly that sometimes there are some good people in with those, you know, with CBC or whatever, but it's about building that relationship, right? Because how many times, you know, when we first started off and everything, and people come up to you and they put the microphone in your face and catch you off guard, and then they take your words and they use it totally out of context for another story because it enhances their story. And so finding that out, and then and that was even with APTN sometimes, where it was like, you know, it's not always just like we heard with you today, like we don't know everything about everything Indigenous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending who we are and where we come from. But the grassroots for sure, like think of how many times we've used like Huffington Post, the different writers, or, you know, in the blogs. Al Jazeera has done like amazing coverage of like 60 Scoop survivors and, you know, issues. Like they've been great allies. Yeah.
And you know, one of the things like Margot taught me, when Margot was an ally of ours who with a lot of organizing, and when we did Parliament Press and things like that, she would call out the media people. She would call them right on the phone and say, listen, this is not acceptable. You need to change this wording right now. Like she would get them to change it, because they're like, you know, you can't talk about us like that. So that's okay to do that. I think, you know, like sometimes when non-Indigenous folks ask us, well, what can I do to help? I'm like, you can use your privilege in a way that gets you into spaces that I typically couldn't get to. I'd be escorted out by security or hung up on. And so like, use your privilege. If you want to like address certain issues in this country, talk to your MLA, get them to push it in Parliament or whatever, the House of Commons, and make them accountable for it. You know, those are things you can do. You can always use your privilege.
Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, I'm hearing it's that we have to hold the people in power over media, over government accountable, using the privilege that we have. And we have a question from Annika asking, saying, thank you for speaking to us today. It is an honor to have you. Do you have any suggestions for more literature that touches on this subject in addition to your own book? And I think she's referring to books about 60s Scoop adoptees.
Yeah, I mean, so Dr. Raven Sinclair, one of her first articles she put out was lessons learned from the 60s Scoop, and it was huge. It was, I can't remember what year it came out, but it was about 10, 15 years ago that she published that, and it was based on a group of adoptees here in Ottawa that were organizing before we started. They didn't do a gathering, but they were having little sharing circles with each other. And Raven based her Raven is a good friend of mine, by the way, and Vicky's. She did her research on that and other adoptees, but lessons learned from the 60s Scoop, Dr. Raven Sinclair, Dale Spencer did an article called Extraction and Pulverization, I believe. Dale Spence. He's based here in sorry, what do you call it? Ottawa. Dale Spence, his article is called Extraction and Pulverization, a narrative analysis of Canada's Scoop survivors. And then Dr. Sarah Cardinal, she also did research, and I was one of her research participants. There's just starting to be research on this one's called Beyond the 60s Scoop. So I participated in that research article of like, what is it like to reclaim your identity, and what was that like to like reconnect to your culture, and how meaningful is it for you? So another survivor just released her book. Her name is
Manish Dunkwe.
yeah, Christine Mishgondinkwe. She just published a book as well. So she published her memoirs. I don't know where her thing is. Christine, this is it right here. She just published her books through Kigo Dance or something. Memoirs of a 60s Scoop. So she is a survivor that came out to a lot of our events as well. So people are starting to tell their stories. It takes a lot to write your book, right? It really, it's hard work because you have to revisit that trauma too. So yeah. Lots of media articles. I've done a lot of media too, but there's other media articles from other 60s Scoop survivors who've shared their stories on YouTube and things like that. Yeah. Oh, here I am checking my Facebook. I wanted to put my book up. Okay, not my book, my map. So.
It's okay. We're only seeing your PowerPoint, I think. So you're okay.
Oh, okay. All right. I was clicking through the things here. Okay.
I've got a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
You have been kind of talking about your story in public now for a little bit, I think, and you're a student also at Carleton. How do you feel? Like, how do you find it? Like you said, reliving that trauma. Do you think that you'll continue to kind of talk about your story? And do you find that the response has been generally positive at universities and other settings?
Yes, I think I always get pretty good feedback because a lot of folks have never really heard of the 60s Scoop or the context for it. I love public speaking, so I don't mind sharing my story. I've done a lot of healing to get to the point where I can talk about it. So as a student, I mean, it helps me in my learning, I guess, because I'm taking criminology right now. So right now, I think we're going to be studying how 60 Scoop survivors, how they've been criminalized, like how they've been through the foster care or adoption experience, the child welfare system, and then ended up criminalized, like leaving that, trying to flee that system of being going through different foster care homes. Whether there was trauma involved, whether it's because like they had rage issues or whatever, but a lot of our people are incarcerated and have been through the child welfare system. So I have a project coming up with Carleton University, the Criminology department, where we'll be doing some research and sharing circles across the country coming up here this spring and summer. So it's, I get that the thing that's been hardest for me is that not doing the gatherings. It's a lot of work and it kind of burnt me out. So I kind of moved away from that. COVID kind of helped us take a break from it. It is hard work to do, to bring people together like that. And, you know, if it's not all like sunshine and butterflies, you're dealing with people who've been traumatized and angry and are lashing out, and it can be really, it caused some burnout for me. So I never intended to do any of this work. I never did. I just wanted to like make a documentary, and I still haven't made that. So I didn't mean to write a book, and I didn't mean to do these gatherings. It just I don't know, the creator just put it on my plate and gave me the skills and the resources to do it. So
I think of when Elaine said too, like, just commit. I remember having this conversation, like coming out of sweat and just being like, commit to working with the people and you'll see like amazing things will happen. And that's what happened, right? Like We for all those years before, like each of us had been doing our healing, doing our work. We were on our journey or whatever. But then once, like for me, I guess that started kind of in 2009 or something where that started. But then once we all came together at that first gathering and we really gained some understanding. There was the thing of you're not the only one. Mm-hmm. Right? And those first sharings that we had together, because I remember I'd already done quite a bit of research at that point. I'd written a chapter on my journey, and that's how, like, Raven at that point, I was getting to meet her in person. Like, she was one of my sheroes. I was like, oh, Raven Sinclair is going to be there, because in reading her research, that, you know, that first one of the Lost and Found, and you're actually reading yourself kind of in black and white on the pages, right? And that was really unsettling, but at the same time comforting. Yeah. And then to get this understanding of like, wow, it's true. Like by the time most adoptees from the Scoop, by the time we were 15 years old, 85% of those adoptions had failed. Yeah. And to get that understanding and these common threads with that first gathering, when we all sat there and shared and realized, like, there were many of us, we even had to, like, a lot of us acknowledged, like, okay, we came from these horrible situations where we had lived a lot of violence and neglect and abuse and that, but we had been in environments that there was privilege. So we got education, we had exposure, like you spoke about, extracurricular activities, and we had exposure to those things, but there was this big gaping hole within ourselves. Yeah, that missing piece of spirituality and that loss of identity and who we are. Yeah. But it gave so many of us momentum, like just looking at some of those photos and how many books and films and like all the good work that so many of us have gone on to do. Mm-hmm. Music and, you know, like visual arts. And I kind of feel like in some ways, like the work that we've done, we're like the pioneers of that 60s Scoop healing, right? And, you know, the other 60s Scoop survivors are just kind of like, just a lot of them are just starting their healing, or, you know, figuring out who they are and so on. So it's, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know doing this gives me, it's not only like, for me, it's like anti-racism work too, right? Because we're undoing some harm and sharing some context to help people learn, you know, broader issues too. Yeah.
Colleen, I was wondering, as part of your healing process, earlier on you mentioned how a loss of language was such a significant loss of identity for some of the adoptees. I was wondering if you have tried relearning your language and what your experience has been, just thinking about the way you differentiate between inanimate and animate objects, and how in English we don't do that, and when we speak the language of our oppressor, we learn to think in very set ways that I feel affect our lives in ways we don't often see. I was wondering if you have any insights into how even the way we speak, the way we interpret the world affects the way we understand it.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, what's funny is because it's a really messed up place for me, because I learned the language of where I was raised on the territory. So I learned which Sault Ste. Marie is Ojibwe territory, and part of like living and working in that community was learning the language of the people that live there and all their customs and rituals. And so my name was given to me by an Ojibwe elder, I'm actually like, it was given to me by an elder. I learned how to say it all in Ojibwe. So it was really problematic for me to go back to my territory and do a presentation and introduce myself in Ojibwe. It was really, but that's the language that I learned. And I remember like panicking and asking somebody, help me to say all these words in Cree, and they're like, I can't do that for you. So I remember like feeling so ashamed that I couldn't speak my own language, but I could speak Anishinaabe Moin, but I'm from this territory. So it was hard for me, but I made a commitment to start learning my language. I just bought Neil McLeod's book, 100 Days of Cree, and it teaches you a word every single day. I'm also changing my name to a traditional Cree name, Sepiko Piesu, so it means blue thunderbird. And I'm in the process, so I've sent my paperwork away and it got sent back to me because of bureaucracy. I filled out the wrong form. I'm supposed to fill out a form for one name. And in a way, for me, it's like a decolonization process because I want to get rid of Colleen Hele-Cardinal and just go back to a Cree name. So it kind of forces me to, I not only can just take on a name as a Cree person, but also like I need to learn the language in order to completely immerse myself in that identity. The thing is, I can never move back to out west because my life is here. My grandchildren are here. I have like friends and family here, and I can't go back to that community. So I have to bring as much of that Plains Cree here. I do go back for ceremony. I haven't been back because of COVID, but I have connected with a spiritual, cultural community there, a small group of people who do ceremony in Saddle Lake. So that's a little bit of, I can go there and learn some of my language and culture and songs and ceremonies, and then come back here and kind of keep it going on. It is work though, that's the thing, right? When you're raised to be a certain way, unlearning that is work. Relearning how to be a Cree person is constant work. It's like you're always a student. You're always having to remind people or remind yourself, I am nehiyaw, iskwew, I am a Plains Cree woman. I am not a white woman. It's so easy for me to go back into being and performing as a white person. And that's the other thing I want to talk about a little bit, is performing as a white person. It's like, it's exhausting. It is exhausting trying to pretend to be somebody I'm not. I don't know if you understand that, but I perform my whole life as a white person, trying to fit in and blend in and talk like them and act like them. And I can turn it back on very easily. And it's very easy for me to fall back into that lifestyle because it's so seductive, it's so easy. But it leaves me feeling like a shell of a person. So anyways.
Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Just looking at the time here. Yeah, go ahead, Grace.
I was just going to say, I think we have time for one more question, and then Vicky has said to has promised to honor us with the song at the very end. So. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to ask that question I see there from Lois?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, or Gabby, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Lois asks, how do you communicate with your home community now? Do you feel acceptance there?
I do now, yes. My first time I went home, I was 16, and I never heard a powwow drum before. I never seen anybody else except for my sisters, right? So like seeing all these people who look like me, like my aunties and uncles, and they all have the kind of same features. It was just mind-blowing for me. The first time I heard a powwow drum, I passed out because I could feel it in my chest, and it scared the crap out of me. But I really still never felt like I belonged there, because it just didn't feel right. So when I went back in 2005 to visit my mom's grave and to kind of heal, I went back for ceremony as well. I met some folks that were from there, and they offered to take me to they have like ceremonies at the university there, Blue Quills. And I was able to visit the school that my mom and all my relatives attended and kind of get a tour of what they went through and look at the yearbooks and really understand and heal. And it kind of like healed my heart to know, okay, my mom went through a lot, and lots happened to her, and I kind of reconciled that anger that I had for her and my dad. But yeah, I go back for ceremonies now, and I feel more accepted. I feel more like I belong there. A lot of my relatives have passed on, so I don't get to connect with them the way that I wanted to, but it's still what I call home. And the other thing I forgot to tell you about was the blood memory of the land, right? So when I went home, and even now when I go back there, the land, it's like my mind remembers it, my blood memory of it. As a child, I used to get homesick, and I always used to look to the west, and I don't know why, but I was always homesick. And for the first time, like when I went back there, I was homesick for the land. I remember it. My blood remembers it. It might sound kind of crazy, but my blood craves the land, to be on the flatness of the land. It's just something pure magic.
Thank you for that, Colleen, for sharing your healing journey and your own process of reconciling with your experience and being open and vulnerable with us, because these are not things that most of us know, and you were never obligated to tell us, but so we really are honored to get to hear this story.
Thank you.
I'm just looking at the time again. I believe Vicky is going to end this on a song. Colleen, if you have any final words, please go ahead and say them. But otherwise, we can transition into a closing with Vicky Boldo leading us in a song.
Thank you so much for hosting, Gabby and Grace. You've been great, and I'm so honored to be here, to be invited. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Vicky, in advance for your wonderful closing.
Well, I thank you, my dear sister, for being here today and sharing all that you did. Somebody in the questions was also making a comment asking if we found the CBC Finding Chloe series helpful.
Yeah.
And that too was one of it. Yeah, it was helpful, wasn't it? I mean, we were doing the work, and then that adoptee too. Through the gatherings, right? There was more of that momentum that continued to build.
Yeah.
So just to let everybody know as well, before we started today, I had virtually made my tobacco offering to Colleen, because that's what we do. We always make offerings with medicines or some other kind of special something, that's meaningful to us, that's not necessarily monetary. The money helps for sure, but there's always something about honoring a person with something that you've put some real thought and care into. So, and Colleen, rather than me sending this tobacco tie over to Odawa, she has asked me to offer this up. So I'm going to put it down before I leave campus today. I'll put it down on campus just to give thanks. And the other thing that we do is especially after we've shared stories like this, is we always send people off in a good way. We close off in a good way, and we kind of, I like it. I was at an event one time with Gloria Steinem, one of the great feminists, and in Montreal, and I offered a song to her, and she said, at the end, she said, wow, isn't that fantastic? Like that song just shifted up the molecules in this space. And I just love that because it's what happens, right? And, you know, unfortunately, we're not together, and maybe on another time we'll get to all be together physically. So, Colleen, I love you, and all my best to you and the family, and I look forward to getting together soon. So I'm going to do the Wildflower song because it was that very first song that I was ever gifted, right, from Cook and Barbara Hooper, after I'd been given my drum. And then years ago when I met Elaine, you know, it's over 20 years ago, I think now, but then how that came into the gathering and doing the drumming workshop and stuff. And that song it's an honor song, but it's a healing song for the women and the children. So with all that we've shared today, I think it's appropriate. And I'll use the rattle rather than the drum because it seems to work a bit better in these virtual spaces on Teams. So, kinaskomtsin kagyao. Hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey ya, hey, hey ya, hey ya, hey. Ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya. Hey, 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 hey. Ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Ya, hey, ya, hey, ya, hey. Hey, 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 hey.
Oh, miigwech, thank you.
I cut it short there, Cookum. I know you got to go get your babies.
Yes, I do. I got to get my babies. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for attending.
Thank you for coming out. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.